Rock and roll. What's up, everybody? Corey Singletary here with the Citizens Utility Board with another episode of CUB Tracks, and joining me as usual,
Tom Content, Citizens Utility Board.
Tom, our Executive Director. And before we dive into it, I just want to remind folks, if you haven't had an opportunity, please hit the subscribe button or the like or the follow, depending on whether you're listening to this via your favorite podcatcher app or whether you're watching this on YouTube. It really helps us out. And that way you don't, miss any future episodes.
Exactly.
But we were chatting earlier and we were like, what should we talk about this week? And, the commission dropped 220 to 157 page documents on everyone in the last few weeks. So we thought that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, there's some new stuff right there.
It's a lot of new stuff. So what do you think? SEA? SEA Focus on Energy, which
Focus on Energy has a quicker deadline, but SEA is kind of the bigger picture. So
SEA is the bigger picture. And
so that's Strategic Energy Assessment for those who don't love acronyms.
Yeah, the Strategic Energy Assessment, which Wisconsin statute requires that the commission put together every 2 years. And, for those who are interested in jumping in the Wayback Machine, I actually had to go look it up to remind myself. But it was back in 1997 that the legislature changed the laws in our state where we used to have a statewide resource planning process, referred to by most as the advanced plan. And in 1997, the legislature spiked that and said we're gonna have the commission do the SEA. And really, the SEA is kind of, depending on how cynical you are, it's just kind of a fact book, but it looks out over the next, I believe, 7 years time horizon, typically in terms of the data they collect, and kind of looks at trends and issues and topics within the utility industry, particularly from the energy and electric side.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of where we are and where we're headed, more so than a planning document. But it is but this one did include a little more information than they've had before on longer term planning by the utilities on their decarbonization strategies. So that was interesting addition this year to this year's report. If anybody didn't think we were in the middle of a huge transition, some of the numbers pop out on this one and this document are just how much coal is being retired and what's being replaced, what it's replacing, being replaced with. And it's the first time I've seen where by the end of this 7-year cycle, it is forecast to be over 20% renewables if you include hydro, wind, solar, and most of the growth coming from the solar projects that have been, some of which have been approved, and many more still in the works.
Yeah, I mean, that probably is the biggest recurring theme throughout the SEA is the impact of decarbonization or the clean energy transition, however you want to refer to it, really from the beginning of the document. And certainly I think we'll probably do a real a deeper dive once the final draft is out. At the moment, there's a draft out for public comment, and we'll be putting in comments on the draft. Those are due in the beginning part of August. But yeah, it's interesting. Some of the things that jumped out to me when I was going through the SEA, I mean, the big one, which I thank the chair and some other commissioners that have come before her. But the SEA today is a much more comprehensive document. It explores the issues facing the industry and then, as a consequence, customers a lot more thoroughly than, say, in 2012 and 2014 when I was at the commission working on the SEA, where basically the direction to commission staff was to keep it as light as possible, to say as little as we possibly could.
Well, that's not a great picture of say as little as possible, because there's a lot to the energy space and what's going on, and it takes, sometimes you have to have a deep dive to really figure out everything that's going on. So I'm glad that this is more comprehensive too.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of data that goes into the SEA, a lot of stuff like Tom talked about in terms of what the resource mix looks like now, what it's going to look like in the future. One of the ones that, and things like rates, and certainly we'll talk about that, as time goes on in terms of what the picture in Wisconsin looks like, how high the rates are, how they compare, and so forth. But given sort of the events over the last several months in Wisconsin, including when we were at Nasuka, the section on reliability was kind of interesting to me. And there's an interesting chart in there that shows your sort of three of the sort of standard reliability indices. SAIDI, SAIFI, CAIDI, which those basically measure how frequently there are outages in the system, what the average length of those system outages are, and also the CAIDI index looks at the average duration for individual customers who are affected by outages. And if you look at that graph, it's interesting because while on a system level, the frequency of outages continues to kind of slowly work its way down, which is great from a reliability perspective. Customers have spent a lot of money on the system, and it's good to see that it's getting more reliable from that perspective. But when we look at the duration, the average duration of outages, and the average duration of outages, not only from a system perspective, but from a customer's perspective.
Right.
We're basically back after the early 2000s being a pretty low period where it was, reliability was pretty good. Those metrics have kind of crept back up to basically the 20th century levels. And there's a lot more volatility too.
Right. And one thing that a different report than the two we're talking about today is there's a utility performance benchmarking report from a different CUB, the CUB of Illinois, and that actually ranked Wisconsin versus others vis-a-vis other states, and on response on duration. There were some real challenges there for Wisconsin vis-a-vis other states. Obviously, the impact of extreme weather events and really significant storms has to be taken into account here, but it definitely shows that Wisconsin's not just sitting on its laurels or anything. So there's some attention that needs to be focused on here.
Yeah, and that you mentioned the extreme storms, and I think, there's a little bit of or in my opinion, I think there is an evolving view on how we look at reliability and response and recovery from severe events. What most people refer to as resilience. Right. Is just as important as sort of traditional, reliability. Exactly. Because if it doesn't really do a lot of people a lot of good if your average numbers are they look nice from a reliability perspective, but when the system does go down, it takes the utility a long time to get everyone back up and connected.
Yeah, and that's a challenge when you've got these big storm systems that are moving from across the Midwest, and so that the utilities have these rapid response collaborations. But where each utility volunteers to send crews to help the other utility that's in trouble, but if multiple utilities are in that line of pathway of that storm, that creates a challenge for everybody in terms of sharing resources and getting the lights back on quicker. So some real issues that need to be looked at there.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation with one of our utilities, and they were receiving mutual aid when they had outages, and they were more in the western part of the state. And there were crews driving to their service territory, and then they got the call to turn back around and head back to their service territory to prepare for outages in their area. So you're right. I mean, with more severe storms, especially storms that and weather that affects larger swaths of the upper Midwest, that all of us have sort of been experiencing, it's something that we need to keep an eye on. What was something else that from your perspective, looking through the draft of the SCA, what was something that really jumped out to you?
Well, I think that for all the talk about coal to renewables, the real shift has been coal to natural gas so far, and it's actually even during the planning horizon for this for this SCA till 2028, it shows that yes, there's a reduction in coal. The timing of the coal being reduced is it being adjusted slightly in recent weeks by the utilities, but overall coal would go down to about 22%, but natural gas would actually increase from 33 to 36% of our power mix. So, there's a lot of attention on the renewable side of things, but I think that was one thing that struck me. But so that we're transitioning from one fossil fuel to another in some ways, but we're also transitioning to battery storage in a big way, which if all the projects that are in the SEA were approved, we'd see an addition of 500 megawatts of battery storage, which if 5 years ago I wouldn't have been expecting that.
Yeah, and we actually just found one more right before we sat down.
Exactly. Exactly. Lots of storage coming.
Lots of storage coming, and with this big transition, and we've talked about it before. Planning is critical, and that since the SEA is not a planning document, that places some challenges on stakeholders in the commission in Wisconsin, and really knowing what's coming down the road. In this SEA round, the commission did ask the utilities a few questions. I felt they were slightly more qualitative than quantitative, asking them about their future plans and how they sort of arrived at their decisions on retirements or new additions and that kind of thing. So that is nice. And then I think, conveniently for the utilities, most of them, whether it's because of their peer or sister utilities in Minnesota with Xcel, have already done an integrated resource plan, or Alliant Energy and We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service prepared a more comprehensive planning document to support their generation acquisition plans. So they actually had something to provide here. But what I'm curious about is, in 2 years, and when we're looking at the next SEA, will the utilities still be taking this sort of holistic look at their fleet, at their resources, and and taking an integrated approach to their planning?
Yeah, and I think people are familiar who know CUB know that we want a better planning process in Wisconsin, and including not a statewide plan like the old advanced plan, but a utility by utility resource planning requirement would help, and it would help, I think, enable everything to be a little bit more proactive when it comes to deciding what our energy future looks like. I feel like we're so often in just a reactive mode, and the utilities have all the information, and the PSC doesn't even have all the information the utilities have. So the recent announcements about delays in the retirements of coal plants is an example there, where I just feel like it's another symptom of a bigger problem where we need a better planning process. And I know we've submitted that in past comments on past SEAs.
Yeah, we won't go down through an exhaustive conversation about that again today. But speaking of planning and things coming down the road, I was glad to see some discussion and some somewhat detailed information in the draft SEA about the MISO long-range transmission plan, and in particular the Tranche 1 plan, which includes 3 segments in Wisconsin that people may not have been aware of. I wish there was a little more information in terms of numbers, in terms of the projected cost benefit, and I think there's cost projections in there from MISO, but it was good to see that. But it may be the first time that people are made aware that there's more transmission investment coming to Wisconsin. Yeah, and $10 billion in investment across the footprint, across the multi-state region. The exact slice of that in Wisconsin isn't. Yeah, I don't have the exact. We don't have the exact number on, but was under the cost, how the costs would be spread across the system, we'd be paying a share of not just the Wisconsin projects, but any project in kind of the Midwest, the upper Midwest section of MISO. I think that's important because one of in the discussion in that draft SEA, they discussed cost drivers, and as has been mentioned, I think in the last few SEAs, is that increases in transmission costs over the long term. There's a graph in the SEA of a 10-year trend, and the biggest bar in that bar chart of cost drivers over that period is increased I believe is the second or the largest, I think, is increased transmission cost. And the draft SEA notes that a lot of that is driven by the last round of investment, which was the multi-value projects, which Cardinal Hickory Creek is the last one of those, as we mentioned before. But if you think about, these sort of MISO-driven investments are largely responsible for the big increase in costs we've seen to date, and now we've got another round coming through. I think it's going to be incumbent upon everyone, not just us, not just our commission, but everyone, all the stakeholders in the MISO region, to try to make certain that we are building the resources we need, but we're building really kind of only the resources that we need.
Yeah, I mean, the cost-benefit analysis has to be good, and the spending has to be justified, because we just talked about the generation side. We feel like we didn't get a long break between building cycles, and now on the transmission side, same ditto, basically. And another round is coming at us.
Yeah, and for folks who want to listen to some comments and discussion and some griping about LRTP, I sat down with Tim Tessier from Iowa, and we have a CUB Tracks episode on that. There was continuation of the last SEA's discussion on affordability, which was nice to see. Anything in that stood out to you?
I mean, I think they're getting better data at the PSC, as we've talked about in prior episodes. But I think they did highlight a UW study that looked at basically some policy options for the Focus on Energy program, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also highlighted where the problems, based on the data we do have, where the problems are worst in terms of energy burden. And in looking at that, we have it's centered in the north and south sides of Milwaukee, but it's not just Milwaukee. In fact, the worst census tracts or neighborhoods in the state were in Milwaukee, but also Menominee, Adams, and Marinette County. So those are the ones that were identified with a household energy burden of 9 or 10%, whereas the average energy burden for the whole state was under 6%. So significantly higher. So I think it's good to see this issue getting more traction with each passing year.
Yeah, it is good to see the additional information, and hopefully we can work with stakeholders and the commission for some on some targeted approaches to help those communities that are facing the greatest economic hardship and greatest energy and utility insecurity. I did note that, consistent with our understanding of what was going to happen in the annual reports this year, the SEA says that the utilities were ordered for 2022 to provide census tract level or higher resolution data on energy burden. And to my knowledge, at least I am not aware of that data existing. So I'm going to have to make some calls and figure out what's going on there. But if the commission has that, what I would love to see, and maybe we'll put it in the comments, is if the commission is collecting data at that level of detail, that level of granularity. In the past, the commission has had staff in-house that can do GIS mapping, and I think it would be pretty easy for them to take all that data and put it into a Wisconsin-specific map that kind of looks like the DOE lead tool map that some people are familiar with, but using actual Wisconsin bill data. And also slightly more timely data than the lead tool, because that uses census data, which takes a while to make its way to the public.
Right. No, that would be a great service.
Yeah. So if anyone from the commission is listening, just a small request, if you could throw that in the queue of things to do with all this information that you're collecting from the utilities, that'd be great. Switching to focus, quadrennial plan, is it 3, 4? Current quadrennial review. Which is the commission's process every 4 years, as the name implies, of sitting down and looking at the Focus on Energy program, looking at all of the various policy and technical decisions that the commission needs to make to provide the guidance to the Focus administrator to then make the program go for the next 4 years. And that also came out recently, and the commission is seeking comments on that. And there's that one was, something like 150 pages long. 21 decision points. I counted that one. There are 21 decision points that are teed up before the commission. And what jumped, as we're early days in looking through that, what was something that jumped out at you?
I think the attention on the low income space is something that I think is important to look at. But what really jumped out at me was the LED penetration in Wisconsin versus other states. So Wisconsin is the third highest state in the country after California and I believe Washington State.
I think it was Arizona.
Arizona, okay. Yeah. One of those western states. But in terms of LED, 87% is the figure for Wisconsin, and that's well above the national average, which shows a couple of things. It shows that the focus incentives have been working. That the fact that LEDs save 90% from the old incandescent bulb is something that actually translates into real energy savings that focus has been able to achieve over recent years. But it also makes you wonder if this is going to be really a refresh or a reboot, because LED, now that LED, with that level of penetration, it's going to take a whole different technologies to really achieve those energy savings going forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that the memo for comment notes is that I think DOE is in the process of considering new rules that would basically do away with incandescent bulbs effectively in the near future. And I think even if that doesn't come to pass, even if there isn't a change in the code with respect to bulbs, it's clear that the market transformation has happened in Wisconsin, and I know that we've mentioned it to various folks when we've talked about focus on energy in the past. We've talked about it with other stakeholders in Wisconsin, and that the days of the low hanging fruit being lighting is kind of over. And the reason that's important to talk about that is I believe the number in the memo was like 80% of residential savings came from lighting measures. And if you can no longer count on providing savings through focus, through lighting measures, because essentially the market has changed so much that all you really can buy are efficient LEDs, then you have to look elsewhere. And so related to that, that LED item, the thing that jumped out to me was there's a discussion in the memo about the energy efficiency research. Can't remember what the last letter in EERD is, but research and development program or fund within Focus on Energy. And there's some questions about funding level for EERD, and especially given this need to not only look at the impact of that energy efficiency can have on time varying costs of delivering electricity, but also potentially needing to find new sources, new ways to deliver energy efficiency savings to customers. In just my personal opinion, I feel like the EERD budget needs to go up.
Yeah, no, I think it's been too low for a while, and I think this what you just said just underscores why it would be so important to increase it. I wonder about how many of homes. When they say 87% penetration, does that mean everybody has all LEDs? I doubt it, but it certainly shows that LEDs are out there. But in our talks about energy savings, I'm still urging people to take the LEDs that they may have sitting in their basement and make sure they're installed in every fixture, and or get LEDs where you don't have them, because it's still something that you can do when in a time of high energy cost pressures. But
yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of homes where it's not every bulb. I think it was actually only about a couple of months ago where we replaced our last compact fluorescent. I couldn't quite bring myself to just throw away a perfectly good compact fluorescent. If it was an incandescent bulb, I would have taken it outside and hit it with a hammer. But yeah, it's there's still a market transformation element to it. But we're basically at the stage where if you go to Home Depot, you go to Target, wherever, and you buy a light bulb, it's going to be an LED bulb. It's probably going to be a reasonably efficient one as well. But you mentioned the low income focus, and there's kind of a wonky discussion in there that I think staff has teed up a sort of a policy question as it relates to statute. But I think they're asking the right questions to lead into hopefully some low income targeted programs that may extend beyond sort of the traditional target low income demographic that Focus usually looks at. So that'll be something we'll have to look into. It's a very wonky discussion about whether or not low income is included in the evaluation and whatnot, which is related to the higher delivery costs for low income. But I think it's an important start to the conversation, and hopefully, in this round and in future rounds in this quad plan, that the commission finds some opportunities to, provide program opportunities, targeted program opportunities for low income.
Yeah, no. Bottom line, there needs to be investment, a greater investment in low income programs. It's just a question of, and Focus has had one of the strongest savings, dollars saved versus dollars put into the program ratios in the country. It had the strongest a few years ago. And so maybe taking some of that some of that savings we're getting and investing it where it's needed. Those targeted communities, Adams County, Menominee County, Marinette. I mean, if there's a way that the utility voluntary programs, Focus, and federal infrastructure money can really attack the problems where the energy insecurity problems where they're worst, I think that's what we're all looking for.
Yeah, and there wasn't a lot of discussion on it, but related to low income, there, in the first round of this quad plan period, the commission issued an order that directed staff to work with other state agencies that provide low income assistance, either directly related to utilities or sort of utility service adjacent. States, things like the state's low income weatherization program and such that are administered through other agencies, so you can get sort of that siloing effect. And they basically, directed staff to start working on better coordination between Focus on Energy and these other programs. And we've even had conversations with utilities on our own in terms of trying to think of ways to come up with programs around energy efficiency that are targeted, that are more of a targeted low income program. And I think that is a huge opportunity that I hope the commission seizes, is to try to find ways to push towards the state delivering assistance to low-income utility customers in a way that's more seamless.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's got to be more seamless, and through efficiency you can actually attack some of the root problems instead. Whereas energy assistance and crisis assistance, it helps people get by, but it doesn't really address the longer-term challenge of inefficient housing stock.
Yeah, crisis assistance and arrearage management programs and all these types of things help folks once the wheels have already fallen off the wagon and you're already behind on your bill. Let's see if we can make it so people have are in a better position affordability wise. So hopefully they don't kind of get stuck behind the eight ball.
Exactly, keep the wheels on the wagon.
Yeah. Anything else when you were skimming through the quad plan memo initially?
I think those were the highlights for me. I mean, there's a lot in there, and there's a lot we need to dig into. But I think looking at the program and trying to figure out whether it's a refresh or a reboot is kind of, given the LED changes, was really a big takeaway for me. How about you?
I mean, it's related to that. So I was not confused, but as I was going through, there were areas where the commission normally makes decisions that to date haven't brought in discussions about decarbonization, for example, and carbon goals and things like that. And for example, a personal pet project of mine and ours organizationally is how the commission looks at goals related to saving energy versus measures that can reduce the need for capacity investment, steel in the ground. And how do you balance the sort of energy savings versus capacity or demand savings? And a lot of the discussion leading into sort of the alternatives for the commission that staff has teed up was kind of rooted in a discussion about decarbonization. It was rooted in sort of, how do you integrate more renewables and things like that. And I found that interesting. My hope is that, those are important considerations as we're looking at focus, but there's also sort of just traditional utility regulation considerations, right? I think we've put in past comments, even in this quad plan period, that with all of these investments in solar and storage that have already been proposed and approved, and all the ones that will come down the road, right? We're in a universe now where we're largely replacing fuel for steel, and so the way to reduce future costs is by avoiding capital investment now. Or if you want to avoid costs 10 years from now, you need to avoid that incremental investment, that incremental plant or whatever it is 5 years from now. And I think it's important to consider both because there's three policymakers on the commission, and we want to make certain that some of these core issues aren't perceived as just being tied towards policy goals, societal goals like decarbonization or electrification or those types of things, because there are still core utility affordability, cost containment issues, that are related to these decisions the Commission's going to be making.
Another issue that was teed up was just the whole issue of how much should focus budget be allocated toward efficiency measures per se versus renewables. And switching back to the other report, you saw a big increase from 20 to 2021 in the number of focus incentives for rooftop solar. And rooftop solar is up to over 11,000 installations in Wisconsin. But going forward, how much should focus really earmark for renewables versus efficiency is kind of another question that's going to be teed up.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. One of the things that certainly helps renewables is there's a chart that Commission staff helpfully corrected, because in the draft it's kind of cut off, but it shows the delivery cost essentially of different types of measures, and one of them that looks like a stock market crash is the cost of solar, and so, the cost per unit delivered for renewable energy is significantly lower than years ago when the Focus Energy program started. And some might immediately think, okay, well, the market has changed. There doesn't need to be market support for renewables. And, I can see that argument, but I think maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. It might be like, okay, well, maybe the goal isn't to just blanket support renewables in Wisconsin, but more target that and saying, okay, where can we deliver the greatest both customer and system savings and system benefits by through customer-owned renewable deployment? Whether it's in specific areas of the areas of the state, rural versus urban, and that kind of thing, and really looking at it and saying, okay, now this is a mature technology tool, just like a lot of the other tools that Focus provides incentives for or in focus programs, and saying, how can we take this tool now that from just a cost perspective is mature and apply it in a more targeted way to get better savings?
Right. No, that's really a really good point. And one thing that it's kind of overarching, but I don't know what the entry point is, but the whole issue of when energy is used versus just energy. Saving energy per se, but energy being used at certain times is pivotal for how the system is planned. And as we shift to more electrification and more EVs, then that becomes a bigger issue too. It's like this whole challenge of focus existing to save energy, but the longer term trend with EVs is toward increased electricity use.
Well, I think you hit on it right correctly. It's both on the planning and delivery and production side, and on the usage side, that the time the time of day, right? Timing is going to be far more critical going forward than it has been at any point. And you teased it out for me, and it's always sort of grinds my gears, but I understand why the number's there. But for example, you look at the number of residential customers who are on time of use rates, and I think it's like what, 1.5%.
Yeah, it's under 2%, and wouldn't you think that a lot of the folks in Wisconsin could benefit from shifting to a time of use rate? At least a good share, maybe not everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers that I've seen with the conversations we've had with the utilities is, certainly it varies from customer to customer, but on average, 50 to 75% of customers are, at a minimum, no worse off, but a lot of customers are better off by doing nothing. If the utility just kind of went in there and did sort of a Folger's taste test and just switched up your rates and you went from a flat rate to a time of use rate, a high percentage of customers would be better off. They would pay less. Maybe not like dramatically less, but less, right? And particularly for customers where they would pay less under a time varying rate, and they are also in sort of an economically tight situation, right? That $5 that you save every in a month, or that $10 you might save in a particular month, I mean, that might be a grocery trip, right?
Yeah, you could spend it on something else
that might be
critically needed.
That might be half a tank of gas, or I guess these days it would be like 2 seconds of squeezing the pump. But that's some gas in the tank to go to work. So I think I don't know if there's an intersection with focus. I don't think there is, but the SEA and Focus raising these issues about how important timing is of when the electricity is produced, when the electricity is used, and how important that's going to be going forward. I think it's something that really needs to be elevated in terms of the public conversation, because most people, they're used to just, electricity is electricity. You go hit the switch, and it's a thing that happens. And I think it will also help, folks who are in favor of renewables. I think it helps that discourse as well, because the better informed people are about, what renewables can and can't do, and being real about that makes it so that we can have real conversations about how we integrate, renewables and storage and wind and solar and any other types of things into the grid of the future, so that we continue to have safe, affordable, and reliable service.
There you go. So it's good. We're good about thinking about the benefits from the whole system, but maybe a benefit for listeners today is if you haven't, if you don't know if you're on a time of use rate, check with your own utility. You might be better off.
Yeah, especially if you're a Alliant customer. This is not meant to be sort of an Alliant, plug. This is not sponsored or anything. But they have the data where if you call them up and you ask them, what would my bill have been last year if I were on this optional rate, they can tell you.
Right.
And there's two optional rates. One is just a time of use rate, and one is a time of use with demand charges. And they can absolutely tell you, at least based off historic, whether you would have paid less or not. And that's how my wife and we decided to switch over to a time of use rate, because it was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer.
Just made sense.
Yeah. All right, Tom, thanks for sitting down, and certainly we're going to continue to look into both of these issues. And I think my understanding is in the next week we might see something fun drop from one of our utilities that we can kind of start digging into. I think there's a bigger policy issue that we can start talking about that affects both utility customers and the entire state. I think that's enough, teasing for that. But
tune in for that one.
Tune in for that one, and catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks.